the man who became an action hero at 56, who taught us that he had a very particular set of skills, hasn't been able to sleep through a full night since March 16, 2009. The day his wife Natasha Richardson died from a skiing accident that shouldn't have been fatal. Liam Neeson, who redefined masculinity for men over 50, now admits he talks to Natasha's grave every day, sometimes for hours, updating her on their sons' lives while struggling with survivor's guilt that medication can't touch. Behind every vengeful father he plays on screen lies a real father who couldn't save the one person who mattered most, who threw himself into increasingly dangerous action roles, hoping physical pain might distract from emotional agony. What you're about to discover will forever change how you see Hollywood's most unlikely action star, a man running from grief that runs faster. If Liam Neeson's performances ever helped you through loss, leave a like and subscribe below. There's a darkness in Liam Neeson's childhood that shaped everything. The morning his father, Bernard Barney Neeson, collapsed in their Ballymena kitchen when Liam was 9, blood pooling from a head wound after falling from a ladder at the school where he worked. That violence, even accidental, left marks that never faded. Liam was born on June 7, 1952, in Ballymena, Northern Ireland, during the Trouble's early stirrings, to Catherine "Kitty" Brown, a cook, and Barney, whose drinking increased with each year of thankless labor. That morning changed everything. 9-year-old Liam found his father unconscious, blood spreading across the linoleum his mother kept spotless. He ran for help. But in 1960s Ballymena, help came slowly. Barney survived, but was never the same. Headaches that made him vomit, tremors that ended his work, and a rage that emerged from brain damage the doctors couldn't fix. My father went from gentle to unpredictable, Liam would reflect decades later. One moment he'd be teaching me to box. The next he'd be swinging at shadows only he could see. The man who'd been the family's anchor became its storm, and young Liam learned to read the weather in his father's eyes. The violence of the Troubles surrounded their childhood like background music to domestic chaos. Bombs exploded in neighboring streets, British soldiers patrolled their school routes, and Catholic-Protestant tensions meant choosing sides in conflicts children shouldn't understand. Liam grew tall early, 6 feet 4 inches by 15, making him a target for both sides who wanted recruits. You were either with someone or against everyone, he explained. Being neutral meant being nobody's friend and everybody's potential enemy. He learned to fight not from choice, but necessity, using the boxing his damaged father taught him to survive schoolyards where religious affiliation mattered more than character. School was refuge and torment simultaneously. Liam excelled at literature and drama, finding escape in performing other people's lives, but his size and sensitivity made him a target. Boys called him soft for preferring books to bombs, for refusing to join either paramilitary side. He was beaten regularly for being too Catholic or not Catholic enough, depending on who caught him. Teachers noticed his talent, but also his tendency to disappear into characters completely, concerning them with how thoroughly he could become someone else. His mother, Kitty, held everything together through exhaustion and prayer. She worked 15-hour days cooking at a local school, coming home to a brain-damaged husband and 4 children who needed more than she had left. When Liam tried talking about the violence at school, about his fear of becoming like his father, about nightmares where blood covered kitchen floors, she'd respond with weary faith, "God doesn't give us more than we can handle." But Liam was handling too much, a father who'd become dangerous, a country tearing itself apart, and the growing certainty that violence was inherited like eye color. By 17, Liam had learned crucial lessons, that men could break suddenly and irreparably, that violence solved nothing but was sometimes necessary for survival, and that becoming someone else through acting. Liam Neeson stood outside Dublin's Abbey Theatre in 1976, having just been fired from his job as a forklift driver at Guinness Brewery for missing too many shifts to attend auditions that never led anywhere. He'd studied physics and computer science at Queen's University, Belfast, but dropped out for teacher training, then abandoned that for acting. A series of false starts that left him qualified for nothing at 30 pounds a week from the dole. He was sleeping on friends' floors in Dublin, picking up odd jobs between auditions, lying about experience to get work as everything from a truck driver to an assistant architect. There was no plan B, he would later admit, but there was no plan A either. I just knew I couldn't spend my life in Ballymena watching myself become my father. Those first years were exercises in specific rejection. Liam's Northern Irish accent was too thick for English productions, not Irish enough for Dublin ones. His 6'4" frame made him wrong for romantic leads. Directors said he looked threatening rather than lovable. He auditioned for over 300 roles between 1976 and 1980, landing exactly 11, all in tiny theater productions where he played thugs, soldiers, or IRL members, typecast by his size and accent. One particularly brutal audition ended with the director saying, "You look like you kill people, not kiss them." The breakthrough from invisibility came through the Lyric Players Theatre in Belfast, where he spent 2 years performing everything from Shakespeare to contemporary Irish drama for barely survival wages. He lived above the theatre in a room without heating, wearing fingerless gloves while learning lines, eating 1 meal a day to save money. His first film role came in 1978's Pilgrim's Progress as Jesus Christ. Ironic casting for someone struggling with faith after childhood violence. The film was a religious production that paid almost nothing, but gave him a screen credit. The real shift came through meeting Helen Mirren in 1980 during Excalibur filming. She was established, sophisticated, and saw something in the rough Northern Irish actor others missed. Their relationship lasted 5 years and opened doors Liam couldn't access alone. "Helen taught me I could be more than a Belfast bruiser," he reflected. "She introduced me to culture, to possibility, to believing I belonged in rooms I'd never have entered." But the relationship also highlighted his insecurities. He was her project, her rough diamond to polish, never quite her equal. But fate's strangest gift came in 1981 when director John Boorman cast him as Gawain in Excalibur, partly because he looked like he could actually wield a sword. The film's success led to more period pieces where Liam's physicality mattered more than his accent. Krull, The Bounty, The Mission. He was working but typecast as historical muscle, the big man who died heroically in the second act. By 1986, he'd appeared in 15 films, but was still taking construction work between roles because playing dead knights didn't pay mortgages. The move to Hollywood in 1987 was desperation disguised as ambition. At 35, Liam was aging out of historical beefcake roles with nothing to replace them. He had $3,000 saved, no contacts, and an accent Americans found incomprehensible. He worked as a bouncer at night while auditioning during days for roles that required him to be generically European or possibly Russian. He was about to return to Ireland defeated when Suspect cast him opposite Cher, a role that finally proved he could do more than swing swords and die nobly. The resurrection from invisibility had taken 11 years, but the man who'd been too tall, too Irish, too threatening, the role of Oscar Schindler in Schindler's List, wasn't supposed to go to Liam Neeson. Steven Spielberg had offered it to Harrison Ford, Kevin Costner, and Mel Gibson, all of whom passed on playing a Nazi who becomes a hero. Liam was 41, still largely unknown despite 15 years of steady work, when Spielberg saw him in a Broadway production of Anna Christie and noticed something others had missed, the ability to convey moral transformation through stillness rather than speech. Liam had exactly 3 months to prepare, learning German, studying Holocaust testimony, and losing 20 pounds to show Schindler's transformation from war profiteer to protector. "I wasn't acting Schindler," Liam later explained. "I was channeling every moment I'd failed to protect someone, every time I'd chosen safety over righteousness." Behind the scenes, Liam was experiencing a psychological breakdown he hid from everyone. The weight of representing the Holocaust, of portraying a man who saved 1,200 Jews while millions died, triggered his Catholic guilt and survivor's complex from the Troubles. He'd spend nights in his trailer weeping, overwhelmed by the responsibility. Ralph Fiennes, playing Eamon Guth, later revealed, "Liam would physically shake before scenes, not from fear, but from the weight of what we were depicting. He felt unworthy of telling the story." The famous scene where Schindler breaks down crying, "I could have saved more," wasn't acting. It was Liam releasing his own anguish about every person he'd failed to help. The physical transformation went beyond weight loss. Liam studied how wealthy men carried themselves versus how broken men moved, creating Schindler's evolution through posture alone. He spent time with Holocaust survivors, listening to testimonies that gave him nightmares, understanding the weight of being chosen to tell their story. But the real preparation was internal, accessing the part of himself that understood moral cowardice, that knew how easy it was to look away from suffering. "Every man thinks he'd be heroic in extreme situations," Liam reflected. "But most of us are Schindler at the beginning, self-interested, comfortable with systemic evil as long as we benefit." When Schindler's List released in December 1993, Liam's performance transformed him from character actor to leading man overnight. Critics who'd never particularly noticed him in 15 years suddenly couldn't stop writing about his towering performance, his ability to make a Nazi sympathetic without excusing his initial complicity. Roger Ebert called it the performance of a lifetime, while survivors who'd known the real Schindler said Liam had captured his essence. The film earned $322 million, won 7 Oscars, and gave Liam his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. But even at this pinnacle moment, Liam struggled with imposter syndrome. "I had everything I'd worked for," he reflected, "but I felt like I'd stolen it. These were real people's stories, real suffering, and I was just a Protestant from Ballymena pretending to understand." The success triggered severe anxiety. He couldn't sleep, developed panic attacks before public appearances, and began drinking heavily to manage the pressure of being Schindler rather than himself. The role that made him a star also taught him that excellence came from excavating historical trauma, that Academy recognition meant carrying 6 million ghosts. The transformation was complete but costly. At 41, after decades of being too tall, too Irish, too threatening, Liam Neeson had become essential. But he'd also become something else, a man who understood that playing heroes required acknowledging the coward within, that portraying salvation meant recognizing damnation. The role that defined his career also defined his burden, forever being measured against a real man who saved real lives, while Liam was just an actor who'd saved no one. By 2008, Liam Neeson wasn't just a respected actor. He was Hollywood's unexpected action hero at 56, commanding $20 million for Taken. After the film earned $226 million against a $25 million budget, proving old in permanence. They'd met during Anna Christie on Broadway in 1993, when both were with other people, but the connection was immediate. When they married in 1994, Liam insisted on a small ceremony, afraid that celebrating too loudly would attract tragedy's attention. He'd watch her sleep, memorizing her face, convinced something would take her. Friends thought it was romantic devotion. Natasha knew it was fear. "You love me like I'm already gone," she once told him, not knowing how prophetic those words would become. Working with directors like Christopher Nolan, Martin Scorsese, and Ridley Scott, Liam became known as the most prepared actor on set, arriving weeks early, training obsessively for action sequences despite his age, insisting on doing stunts that insurance companies begged him to skip. What they didn't know was this preparation was anxiety management. If he controlled every variable, perhaps he could control outcomes. During take and filming, he trained in combat techniques until his knees required daily draining, hiding the pain, because working meant not thinking about unnamed dread. Success after struggle doesn't erase the struggle, Liam told his trainer during this period. It just gives you more to lose. By early 2009, at the peak of his unlikely action, hero transformation, Liam Neeson had reinvented himself at an age when most actors were accepting grandfather roles. He had a loving family, financial security, and the kind of career renaissance that rarely happens. But he also had crippling anxiety. He was married to producer Robert Fox. He was with agent Jennifer Richardson, creating a foundation built on passion, but shadowed by guilt. They'd met during Anna Christie on Broadway in 1993, where their chemistry was so intense that audiences thought they were having an affair before they actually were. I thought I'd found my person, Liam would later reflect. Someone who understood that love meant choosing each other over everyone else's opinions. They married on Richard Branson's estate with only immediate family present, Liam insisting on privacy because happiness announced too loudly attracts tragedy. Their marriage produced 2 sons, Mikhail in 1995 and Daniel in 1996, and appeared to be Hollywood's rare genuine love story. But beneath the surface, Liam struggled with allowing himself to be fully happy. He'd check on Natasha multiple times during nights, confirming she was breathing. He insisted she call him when arriving anywhere, panic rising if she was 5 minutes late. Liam loved me like he was preparing to lose me, Natasha told friends. His previous relationship with Helen Mirren had ended partly because she couldn't handle his intensity, his need to control everything to prevent loss he couldn't define. The dynamic in their marriage was Natasha bringing lightness to Liam's darkness. She came from theatrical royalty, the Redgrave family. Joy was worth the risk of loss. In June 2009, 3 months after Natasha's death, Liam Neeson collapsed on the set of The A-Team in Vancouver, his body finally rebelling against grief he'd been suppressing through 18-hour workdays and bottles of whiskey that replaced meals. The immediate diagnosis was exhaustion and dehydration, but the real condition was complete nervous system breakdown, panic attacks that felt like heart attacks, dissociative episodes where he'd forget where he was, and chronic insomnia that no medication could touch. My body quit because my mind couldn't process that she was gone, Liam later admitted. Every cell was rejecting a reality where Natasha didn't exist. The exact medical crisis was more complex than grief. Liam had developed atrial fibrillation, irregular heartbeat triggered by stress and alcohol that required cardioversion to restore normal rhythm. His blood pressure spiked to stroke-level readings. He'd lost 30 pounds in 3 months, existing on coffee and whiskey. His 6-foot 4-inch frame, gaunt enough that costume departments had to pad his clothing. The alcohol consumption had reached a bottle of whiskey daily, not for pleasure, but for numbing. I wasn't trying to die, he explained to his doctor. I was trying to not feel alive. The physical manifestations were undeniable. Liam's hands developed tremors that made holding props difficult. He'd have vivid hallucinations of Natasha in peripheral vision, turning to empty spaces where she should be. Sleep brought nightmares where he could have saved her if he'd just been there, been faster, been better. Waking brought the fresh realization she was gone. He developed claustrophobia in places that reminded him of the hospital, couldn't tolerate the sound of medical equipment, would panic at the smell of antiseptic. The treatment required intervention from his sons and Natasha's mother, Vanessa Redgrave. They found him passed out in his study, surrounded by empty bottles and photos of Natasha, having not eaten in days. The hospitalization that followed wasn't publicized. Official story was exhaustion. But Liam spent 2 weeks in psychiatric care for acute grief disorder and alcohol detoxification. Rock bottom was my teenage sons having to parent me, he reflected, seeing fear in their eyes. The same fear I'd had finding my father bleeding, that broke through the numbness. Recovery wasn't about healing, but learning to function around permanent damage. Liam's daily routine became rigid structure to prevent collapse. 5 a.m. wake regardless of sleep, physical exercise to exhaust the body, work to occupy the mind, controlled drinking instead of abstinence, because abstinence meant feeling everything. He couldn't remove Natasha's belongings, keeping her closet exactly as she'd left it. Her coffee cup unwashed in the kitchen, her pillow still indented. Grief doesn't get better, he explained. You just get better at carrying it. The return to work was necessity, not choice. Liam threw himself into action films because physical pain distracted from emotional agony. During unknown filming, he insisted on doing an underwater stunt that nearly drowned him, later admitting he'd waited too long to signal distress on purpose. The Taken sequels became exercises in controlled violence, channeling rage at the universe through choreographed revenge. Every punch I threw on screen was a god for taking her, he confessed. The man playing action heroes was really a grieving widower, using work as organized self-destruction. Each film a new way to hurt enough that internal pain seemed manageable by comparison. The call came at 4 a.m. on June 9, 2020, while Liam was in Melbourne filming Blacklight. His sister Bernadette's voice breaking as she told him their mother Catherine, Kitty Neeson, had died at 94, alone in a nursing home where COVID restrictions meant family couldn't visit. The woman who'd held their family together through his father's brain damage, through the troubles, through poverty that should have broken them, died without her children beside her, because pandemic protocols treated love as non-essential. She died thinking we'd abandoned her, Liam told Bernadette through tears. The woman who never abandoned anyone died alone because we couldn't get past hospital security. Kitty had been the constant in Liam's chaotic life. After Natasha's death, she'd moved temporarily to New York, cooking for her grandsons, helping Liam remember to eat, being present without demanding conversation. She'd understood grief, having nursed her brain-damaged husband until his death, raising 4 children through Northern Ireland's violence. Your mother was a saint, she'd tell Liam about Natasha. Saints don't get long lives. They get meaningful ones. Was buried without the community meal that defines Irish grief. Even her death was stolen from us, Liam said bitterly. COVID took not just her life, but our ability to honor it. What followed was Liam's recognition of generational patterns. His mother had spent her life managing damaged men, first her husband, then watching her son struggle with the same darkness. She'd witnessed Liam's rise to fame, but also his descent into grief after Natasha, seeing history repeat in different keys. She lived long enough to see me become my father, Liam reflected, broken by loss, medicating with alcohol, saved only by work that killed you slowly. The parallel losses compounded into unbearable weight. First his father to brain damage when Liam was young, then Natasha to brain death when he was 56. Now his mother to isolation when he was 68. Each loss involved the brain somehow, injury, hemorrhage, or the inability to understand why families were set, his financial advisor noted with concern. The survival mechanism was accepting anything that filmed far from New York. European action films, Canadian thrillers, Australian productions. Geography that prevented him from visiting Natasha's grave daily, a ritual that had become obsessive. He'd take scale wages for independent films just to stay moving. Run All Night, A Walk Among the Tombstones, Nonstop, titles that described his existence. Between films, he'd disappear to Ireland, drinking in pubs where nobody knew him as anything but Billy Neeson's son. The slow realization came through his son, Michael, who changed his surname to Richardson to honor his mother. Watching his son act, seeing Natasha's talent emerge, forced Liam to confront that he'd been performing grief rather than processing it. "Dad, you're not in these movies," Michael told him after watching Taken 3. "You're just there." The truth was devastating. Liam had made millions playing the same character repeatedly, a man saving everyone except the person he'd actually lost. By 2015, his net worth had increased while his artistic worth had vanished. He was Hollywood's most profitable grieving widower. Each revenge plot, another failed attempt to fight death and win. By 2024, Liam Neeson's appearance at film premieres became carefully managed events, where handlers guided him through interviews he'd immediately forget giving. His responses increasingly repetitive as he told the same stories about Natasha, unable to create new memories that didn't include her. At 72, the physical toll of 15 years of action films had left him with chronic pain, requiring daily medication, hands that shook from nerve damage, and a limp he could no longer hide despite custom-made lifts in his shoes. What the public didn't know was that Liam had been diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment, likely from accumulated head trauma from stunts and alcohol damage, making it difficult to remember new scripts, requiring extensive the same neighborhood where Natasha had lived, unable to leave despite the memories. He'd walk past her favorite restaurants, sit in parks where they'd taken the boys, existing in a geography of grief. His sons visited regularly, but struggled with his increasing confusion. The way he'd sometimes think they were still teenagers, asking about school long finished, girlfriends long gone. Recent controversies only deepened his withdrawal. Comments about wanting revenge after a friend's assault, where he admitted to racist thoughts 40 years ago, resurged periodically despite apologies. His admission that he'd visited Natasha's grave daily for 15 years was criticized as unhealthy obsession. An interview where he seemed unaware he'd been asked the same